Okay, we should be recording. Good evening and welcome to the Springfield Community Preservation Committee meeting. Today is September 1st and the time now is 6:19. My name is Karen Lee and I am the administrative coordinator for the committee. The recording secretary for tonight is Suzanne Jovel, and the CPC logo was designed by Nancy Urbachat of TSM Designs. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to the governor's executive order concerning the open meeting laws, the city of Springfield is providing notice that this public meeting will be conducted using remote collaboration technology. This remote meeting can be found on facebook.com/Springfield Community Preservation Committee. As a reminder to everyone participating tonight, please mute yourselves until you're called upon to comment. The Springfield Community Preservation Act was created by the legislature and governor in the year 2000. It was adopted by voters in Springfield in November 2016, and the CPA ballot question passed in all 8 wards, 17 neighborhoods, and in 63 of the 64 precincts. This is Springfield's 3rd year of grant funding. We're gonna stop sharing, sorry. Funding for CPA projects is created through a 1.5 surcharge on real estate taxes and a statewide Community Preservation Act fund distributed to the municipalities and funded by the Registry of Deed Fees. In the most recent cycle, approximately $2.1 million was available to fund projects in neighborhoods throughout Springfield. We expect, with the strong support of the Community Preservation Act, that individuals and civic groups will consider CPA as a funding resource for community-related projects. Photos of previously funded projects can be found on the CPC Facebook page, and prior applications and more information can be found on the Springfield mass-ma.gov finance page. You can email us at cpc@springfieldcityhall.com. Our telephone number here is 413-530-1268. You can also reach us by mail, City Hall, Community Preservation Committee, 36 Court Street, room 412, Springfield, 01103. If you have a suggestion to increase outreach for next cycle, or if you'd like to be placed on our mailing list for updates, or you have a public comment on tonight's meeting, please use the information given. CPA funds are available to individuals or groups in the following 3 categories: recreational and open space, historic resources, and community housing. In Springfield, 9 members serve on the committee to review and recommend projects to the City Council for funding approval, and each member is appointed to serve a 3-year term. 3 members are appointed as neighborhood representatives, and 1 representative is appointed from each historical commission, Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, Park Commission, Housing Authority, and the Springfield Preservation Trust, Inc. And with that, I'll turn the meeting over to our chair, Robert McCarroll, to introduce the committee.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome everyone tonight. So present for tonight's meeting is Gloria DiFilippo, the Planning Board representative, Juanita Martinez, the Conservation representative, Ralph Slate, one of the neighborhood representatives, Willie Thomas, the Housing Authority representative, and I'm Bob McCarroll, the Springfield Preservation Trust, Inc. representative. Our other members are not with us tonight, but they are David Finn from the Historical Commission, Terry Rodriguez from the Park Commission, Terry Mitchell from the neighborhood. Who am I missing? Maybe I'm not missing anybody. So with that, we'll move into the business, and the first thing is to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was on August 4th. And I guess the only correction that I see here is I do not believe that Terry Rodriguez was present for the meeting, and she's listed as present. So unless someone else has a different memory, we need to amend her as being absent.
The last meeting was the time of the storm. So if it was, Terry Rodriguez was there. She had to leave because the tree fell on her truck.
Right.
Oh, okay.
She was there at the beginning, right?
Yep. All right. So a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Second. All right. So roll call vote. Gloria,
Yes.
Juanita,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Willie,
Abstain?
abstaining. Okay. And Bob is yes. All right. So the next order is we have a presentation from Stuart Saganar of the Community Preservation Coalition on bonding. You know, we had a discussion this past funding round, and although we chose not to go the bonding route, Stuart has offered to give us a little tutorial on it. So if that issue comes up ever again, we'll have an idea of what is involved in it. I think many people know Stuart from when we were first organized. He came and ran a workshop for us, and Ralph and I had met him even prior to that when he came to help the Citizen Committee get started in advocating for the adoption of CPA. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Stuart.
Great. Thanks, Bob. And Karen is going to run the slides for a short presentation we have about bonding. This is a topic that is very popular across the state. Well over 100 CPA communities have bonded against their future revenue stream for big projects. And there are in the neighborhood of $350 million in outstanding CPA bonds right now among all those communities. So it's pretty popular as a way to do things that you don't have the money sitting in the bank for, the same way your city does large projects that they don't have the money sitting in the bank for. It's the same concept. The city bonds against its tax revenue stream to buy a fire truck or build a new building or build a school. And CPA communities can also bond against their future CPA revenue stream for different projects. So Karen, you want to throw up the first slide?
Sure.
Which is probably a title slide, so we can skip to the next one. All right, so as I mentioned, we're now, as of the end of the fiscal year last year, up over 100 communities that have now bonded. And some you can see have bonded more than once. So there's 95 communities in this case, and it's now over 100 as of June 30th. But we have 250 projects. So I know my community has bonded 4 times for different CPA projects. Although you can bond for most things that CPA can pay for, the most popular ones are when communities buy land, when they do a top to bottom restoration of a historic building like a town hall or a city hall, or when they're building large recreational assets, big athletic field complexes, parks and things like that. Those are the 3 most popular, but we've had communities bond for many other things as well. So scroll up a little bit more, Karen. All right, so when you bond against your future CPA revenue stream to do a project in Springfield, it is a general obligation bond of the city of Springfield. But what's backing it is your CPA revenue stream, not the general municipal revenue stream of the city. When you're trying to figure out how much you can bond, how much capacity you have to bond, you can only bond against what you bring in locally in Springfield. As you all know, CPA has 2 revenue streams: your local surcharge revenue from your 1 or 1.5%, Bob? 1%, right?
1.5.
Half, okay. So that's your local revenue stream, your 1.5% property tax surcharge, but you also get that state match every November 15th. But that varies, as we have seen over the past few years, and as we discussed actually already. So you can only bond against the local portion, not the state portion, because it's an unreliable funding source. And the one thing to remember is when the CPC does recommend bonding for a project, now, as with any CPA project, it goes to the city council for approval, but it ratchets up the level of approval you need at the council from majority to 2/3. So most recommendations that you make to the council, with a few exceptions, can be passed by majority vote of the council. But if you're recommending that a project be paid for with a CPA bond, that would require a 2/3 vote of the council. And page 4, Karen? All right, so it's a good idea to always know what your bonding capacity is. So you're going to get applications this year, and you never know what type of applications are going to come in the door. And you're going to start talking about those and reviewing them and considering which ones you want to do. And you may find that you want to do more than you have money for. And if you always know how much capacity do you have to bond, it makes the discussion much more productive. Whereas if you're just talking about your current revenue, you might have to eliminate some projects that, otherwise you might want to do. So what we recommend folks do is work with your municipal officials, your municipal accounting and finance department, and they can do an estimate of how much bond capacity you have. And how much money you would be able to issue in a bond. So it's a good idea sometime, between now and the end of the year, maybe to make an appointment with them and go sit down and look at the figures and have them do a bond estimate. And then, of course, it would need to be updated every year because interest rates change, of course, and the amount of projects you've done changes every year as well. So a bond capacity spreadsheet that you have at your disposal when you discuss projects is a good thing to have. So are other people not seeing the presentation, or is it just me?
No.
No, it's disappeared.
Okay.
Okay.
Karen disappeared too?
No, I'm still here. I was attempting to move it and I lost the presentation. So I'm going to find it, but why don't you go ahead, Stuart? I am so sorry and apologize for this.
I should have probably printed out a copy of it and had it in front of me so I could have continued without looking at it. I cannot recall exactly what is on that particular slide beyond the bonding capacity information. I know you'll see a sample in a second of a bonding capacity spreadsheet from a community where they met with their municipal officials. They looked at what the revenue would be in the next 20 years from the 1.5% surcharge. They subtracted other bonds that the town had already issued. And of course, you don't have any other bonds that you've issued. And they come up with an amount every year over the next 20 years that you would have to bond, and money that you could use for projects. And you can only, obviously you can't bond everything because you might be bonding an open space project. And of course you have to leave some money for historic and housing as well. But you'll see how that looks on the spreadsheet when Karen gets it back up. So I'm going to pause there until we see it again.
Okay.
Do I actually hear crickets?
That is hysterical, Ralph. Yes, I do too.
There is.
I was about to make a joke about that. You know how when there's this awkward silence among a whole group and you said you could hear crickets in the room? And I'm thinking to myself,
Yeah.
I actually hear crickets. So who's near a cricket? It's got to be coming from someone whose microphone is not muted. So Ralph, it has to be you, myself, Willie, or Bob.
Bob.
Or Karen. Bob, you near crickets?
I am not.
Okay. Do we see anything on the screen now?
We see
Only our logo.
Okay. So I'm seeing it. How about now?
Well, it says Karen has started screen sharing.
There we go.
Got it? Oh my goodness.
Yep.
I am profusely apologizing for this, Stuart, throwing you off like this.
Everyone else is seeing it again, right? Give a thumbs up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So Karen, you're on page 2, so you can go, I think, to page 4 we were on, right?
Okay, I'm not touching anything and trying to do anything else while you are speaking.
No problem. So you can go to 5, actually. I think we covered everything in 4, talking about the bonding capacity. So 5 is like I thought, that this is a sample of a bonding capacity spreadsheet. And we actually have this on a spreadsheet. So Karen or Bob, if you want this in a live spreadsheet that would be easier to build with your numbers, we're happy to share it with you. This is a PDF of it, obviously, but we have the actual spreadsheet that was used in this particular case. You can see it was a long time ago, but you know, the finance department filled in the local CPA revenue, which for this community in 2008 was $525,000. You know, they were talking about an open space bond here. So as I mentioned, you know, you can't spend that entire $525,000 on a bond for an open space purchase, because every year you have to reserve 10% for housing and 10% for historic and probably 5% for administration. So Karen can get paid. So in this case, the community, after subtracting that, had $393,000 available to pay back a bond, but they had some existing bonds out there. So in the end, the fund that was available starting in 2008 for this community to pay for a bond was $135,000. And then down the bottom, the finance department was able to figure out that the town could borrow $1.79 million at the current interest rate back then, which was 4.5%, for 20 years. And that would come up to $135,000. So as you can see, this kind of gives you an idea of what you have. And in this case, the capacity this community had to bond was just under $2 million. Interest rates now are a lot lower. You'd be surprised at how low municipal interest rates can be. Your city can get a much better rate than you would get if you went to get an auto loan or a mortgage or even a home equity loan. They're probably in the 1.5% to 2% range to borrow money for a municipality these days. So it goes a long way. Next page, Karen. Page 6. So again, let me know if you want a copy of that spreadsheet. And I don't expect you to be able to read this, but when you issue a bond, every year there's both principal and interest. And your municipal officials, you know, if you go to them and say, hey, we're thinking of buying this this piece of open space, or we're thinking of rehabbing this gigantic city historic building, please let us know how much you know, a $2 million bond would be. They'll be able to come up with a debt service schedule like this, so you can determine how much it's going to cost you every single year for the next 20 years or so. Anyone who has a mortgage is familiar with these debt service schedules, right? Where you know how much your mortgage payment is every year for the whole 30 years you have a mortgage, principal and interest, and then the total. So your finance people would be able to come up with this for you using the current interest rates. Next, Karen. All right, so when you're considering a project, and let's pick a project that we'll use as an example. You know, a historic building in Springfield needs, owned by the city, needs rehabilitation. So you as a committee can look at that project and decide that you want to use bonding as the funding source. You can decide that you want to pay for some of it right up front out of the money you have in the bank and bond the rest of it. You have options. And you also have options of how long the bond is for. In Massachusetts, the limit on bonds used to be 20 years, but about 5 years ago, the state extended that to 30 years. So you can go 30 years on a bond. And obviously, just like a mortgage, the advantage to going longer on the period of time is the payments every year is lower. If you go 30 years instead of 20, you're going to pay less every year. The negative is you're going to pay more interest because now you're financing that money for 30 years instead of 20. So the state has a big schedule that shows what assets can be bonded for what period of time. If the city buys a police car, they're not going to let the city bond that police car for 30 years because the expected life of a police car is not 30 years. So the schedule the state has might say police cars can be bonded over 5 years. Fire engines maybe over 20 years. Most things that are CPA eligible are usually 30 years. If you buy land, you can bond it for 30 years. If you do a major construction project for housing, historic preservation, you can do it for 30 years. You build a park, it can be 30 years. So most of the things you would bond for CPA, the state would allow 30 years. And you folks, when you recommend that project to the council, and if you're going to recommend bonding, you guys get to determine how long that bond is, because that affects the payment every year, and that affects how much money you're going to have to spend on other projects. So using that debt service schedule that we showed you, you might want to ask the finance department when you're thinking of doing this historic building, show me what it would cost us each year if we did a 10-year bond, a 15-year bond, or a 30-year bond. And then you can see how much it's going to be in terms of debt service every year, and then see how much money you'd have for other projects. The shorter you go, the less money you're going to have for other projects. The longer term you go, the more money you'd have for other projects every year. All right, next, Karen. So you want to put that recommendation as part of your vote as to how many years you are recommending. So once the city votes for it, it looks like any other order for a CPA project that they vote on. It is being bonded under the authority of Chapter 44B, which is CPA. We would always recommend that when you recommend a bonded project, that you include not only the $2 million you need to rehab that historic building, but also the miscellaneous closing costs. Because to issue a bond for a municipality, there are definitely some costs, some upfront costs. And it's not inexpensive. It can be anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 or more in legal fees and other miscellaneous costs to issue a bond. And those can be bonded. So if you were bonding a $2 million project, you'd want to get an estimate from the city of what the miscellaneous costs were, and you'd recommend to the city council that a bond, the project be $2,050,000, so you could pay for the expenses as well. You can also, as I talked about, pay for some of the project up front. If you have $1 million in the bank and you want to pay for $1 million and only bond the second $1 million, that's fine too. The good thing about CPA is when your city, and cities often don't do this, and maybe Springfield has never done an override for a bond, but when communities do issue large bonds, they do have to be approved at the ballot. The city council can only recommend it, and then the ballot has to vote. So the citizens have to vote if it's going to be a very large bond that needs an override on the tax base. With CPA, there is no subsequent election ever needed. You've already had your election. The city residents gave you a 1.5% revenue stream to work with. You're just bonding against that previously authorized revenue stream. So there is no need for it to go back to the ballot. So the process is you recommend it, city council approves, and then they can go ahead and issue the bond. There's no election necessary. Next slide. All right. So one of the neat things, by the way, this picture is, these pictures are usually all of bonded projects in this presentation. This is Gloucester City Hall, which needed a top to bottom restoration. And it's one of the main reasons that Gloucester passed CPA was because they wanted to renovate their spectacular City Hall. Has anyone ever seen that building? It is unbelievable. It's It was built on top of a hill so that as all the fishermen make the final turn into the harbor, they look up and that's what they see is the big steeple and City Hall in Gloucester. So it just means an awful lot to the community. And that steeple was in such tough shape when CPA was adopted in Gloucester that if the wind blew above 30 knots, they had to evacuate the building because they were worried about the steeple toppling over onto the rest of the building. So it needed work, and CPA came to the rescue there to issue a bond for that building. When you recommend the project, you're going to have debt service every year. So the city will tell you, after you recommend a bond and the council approves it, the next year you're going to have to make your first payment, just like you make a payment on a mortgage. And you're going to need to include that in your budgeting because you're going to have less money to spend on other projects. You're going to have to recommend that every year for the next 20 or 30 years. When you're recommending your annual projects, you're going to have to say, and we're recommending $135,000 to pay for that $2 million historic bond we issued. The city council could choose to pay that out of another funding source since it is a general obligation bond of the city. I don't know why they would do that, but they could, if they wanted to, not use CPA money. But it doesn't work in reverse. If the city already has a bond for something that is a CPA eligible project, if they already bought a piece of open space or already used some money to restore a historic building, and they're in year 5 of the bond payments and they say, hey, that was a historic building. Let's have CPA pay the bond. Let's apply for the money for CPA to pay this year's debt service. That is not legal. It has to be bonded from the very beginning under the CPA, under Chapter 44B. So you cannot pay the debt service of a non-CPA bond. Number 10, Karen? All right, so the neat thing about a CPA bond is it's probably going to be more than 10% of your annual budget. So that counts as the 10% required spending for that year in that category. So if you did a historic building, there happens to be a picture of open space here that was bonded, but we're going to continue on with the historic building example. If you had bonded $2 million for a historic building and you had $135,000 payment every year, if that is more than 10% of your annual revenue, you don't have to put another 10% in your historic reserve. That payment on the bond is more than 10% of your revenue. Therefore, it counts for your 10% historic spending that year. You could choose to put another 10% in the historic reserve, but you don't have to, because if the bond payment is more than 10%, it's going to cover that. All right, next, Karen. All right, so let's show how that works. So let's say Springfield had $100,000 in total revenue. I realize you have much more than that. And you did, in this case, an open space bond. You would have to take $10,000 out of that $100,000 in total revenue and put it in your historic reserve, 10% in your housing reserve. But your debt service on the open space is a $15,000 payment. So you do not have to put aside any more money for an open space reserve. You put aside your 5% for administrative. The last $60,000, if you didn't have any projects, would go in what's called the budgeted reserve. And that's how you would do your budget for the year. So that just illustrates how the debt service can count as the 10% that you're required for that year. Okay, Karen? Oh, we lost it. I think you just need to click on it again on my drive there. There we go. So we're seeing it again, Karen. So just go back to slide 10 we were at, I think. Oh, no, we were at 12. All right, so this question comes up all the time. I guarantee you if you just start discussing the bonding of a big project in Springfield, someone is going to ask you, either from the public or a city councilor or the municipal officials, well, gee, if we issue a 20-year bond or a 30-year bond against our future revenue stream, are we then locked into having CPA for 30 years? Because as you probably know, once you reach the 5-year point, CPA can be revoked in a community. And it has to go back to the ballot to be revoked. And communities can also reduce their CPA surcharge as well, below the 1.5%. So that question always comes up. What happens? Does this take away our right to revoke, as citizens, does it take away our right to revoke CPA in Springfield if Bob and Juanita and Gloria and everyone else does something that's terrible and we don't like it anymore? And the answer is no. It does not take away the right to revoke. You could still have a ballot election and revoke CPA in Springfield. But there's no free lunch. You still have to pay back that bond, right? You still issued a $2 million bond. The work's been done. That historic building looks great, but you still owe $2 million to the bondholders. So if the community then decided to revoke CPA, they would add up all the money that you have in your accounts. And if that was enough to pay off the rest of the debt, then the 1.5% would fall off the tax rolls. If it wasn't enough, they would keep the CPA surcharge on your tax bills. Some communities have 3%, some have 2%, you have 1.5%. So the 1.5% would continue on your tax bills, and but you wouldn't be able to do any other projects. All that money would go right to the bond payment, and they'd probably end up paying it off faster that way if you were putting every bit of your revenue toward that bond payment. There's a third way to do it. You would need the Department of Revenue approval. But let's say you have a 1.5% surcharge, but let's say the amount of money you need to raise for the bond debt service every year is 0.5% of your revenue, not 1.5. You could lower it to 0.5% for the next 25 years, however long the bond was, and that 0.5% would just go right to the bond payment. So effectively, you'd be out of business, but the 0.5% would stay on your tax bills. So the bottom line to remember here is that it doesn't take away the community's right to revoke CPA if they want to, but the bond has to be paid some way before the surcharge will completely drop off the tax bill. This has never happened because, as you probably all know, we've never had a community revoke CPA. So we've never had a community revoke. We've never had a community that had an outstanding bond revoke. So luckily, this has never been an issue for anyone, but it is possible if need be. So I think that's it. It's not a long presentation, but it does tell you everything you'd want to know. And since you are just at the beginning of your process again for the coming year, the one thing that you might want to do as a result of this is at some point meet with your municipal officials and do a bonding capacity spreadsheet, and that'll tell you how much capacity you have, and just tuck that in your drawer. And then as projects come in, you have a figure in mind above the $1 or $2 million you have to spend from your regular revenue that you could go to if the project was really compelling and you wanted to do it over and above the other projects that came in that year. So, Bob, do you want to open it up to questions before you go?
Sure. Yeah, and I guess I would start, Stuart, with a question of, can CPA be a funder of a portion of a larger bond? So let's just say that there was something that was going to cost $2 million, and the applicants had come to us and say they want us to help with $1 million of that $2 million. It's still going to be a bonded project, but they're only asking us for half of it. Is that a case where then there are two separate bonds going out, a municipal bond and a CPA bond, or is there something that commits that CPA can indeed fund half of the municipal cost once the bond goes into effect?
It's the second thing you said. So
yeah,
that is actually not all that uncommon. So you absolutely could do that. They're only going to issue one bond because you remember I said there are some fixed costs for issuing a bond. You're not going to want to issue two $1 million bond because you're going to pay $30,000 or $40,000 in fixed bond issuance costs on each. So the city would definitely only issue one $2 million bond in your example. And they would have an authorization from the CPC and the city council for $1 million to be charged against CPA and $1 million to be charged against some other revenue source. And when the bill came in every year for the debt service, they would just divide it in half, and they would charge half to the CPA budget and half to the other municipal budget. I'll even tell you one other thing that's possible. And this is encouraged in the act as well. But because of these issuance costs, it does make sense for cities to group projects together in one bond. So let's say you guys recommend that $2 million historic fixing of a building, and you're recommending it for 20 years. And you pass it, and then the city council passes it. Well, around the same time, the city council might pass $2 million to rehab a fire station. So now they have a $2 million they have to bond over the same 20 years for a fire station. The city can combine the CPA project and the non-CPA project in one bond and put it out to market. And this is pretty common. We had that happen in my town. In the spring, we voted to buy a piece of open space, and we bonded over 20 years. But in the fall, the town knew they were going to be voting on a new police station. And so they held off issuing the full bond until the town had voted on the police station. And sure enough, the town agreed to do the police station. So they went out to the market with a $10 million bond, an $8 million police station, and $2 million of CPA open space purchase. And when the bill comes in every year, the town just charges 20% to the CPA budget and 80% to the police station budget. So that is definitely possible, either on a CPA project, or the city might, after you're approved, might combine your bond with others.
Okay. Anyone else have questions of Stuart on bonding?
Yeah, I have a question. If an applicant comes in with a large project and we bond it, and then say it's a 20-year bond,
Mhm.
but in those 20 years, they want to do something else to that, say it's a building, a park, whatever.
Yep.
Can they come back to us, not for a bond, but a regular application?
Absolutely. Assuming you hadn't bonded everything that you have, on that first project or on other projects as well. But sure, yeah, that bond is going to be already issued. It's already going to be out there. The work will have already been done on that first project, and 15 years later, they need something else, and you still have 5 years of debt service payment left. And they might come to you and say, we need $50,000 to, build a new basketball court. We want to add a basketball court to the park. That's perfectly fine. You can't add on to the bond that's already outstanding. That bond's already
Right.
You would pay that out of your, out of your existing revenue.
Okay. And anyone else have questions? Ralph, Gloria, Willie?
I have something if no one else has a question for Stuart.
Okay, Karen.
Okay, and two things. One, if you could send that spreadsheet template
Yep.
that you were referring to, if you could email that to me, that would be great, and copy Bob on that. And this doesn't have to do with bonding, but do you offer a similar workshop for housing, for affordable housing workshop? I know you're having one next year, was canceled in February and rescheduled, right?
So in terms of what particular part of housing? We did one on, we did a webinar on rental assistance a couple months ago in combination with the Mass Housing Partnership and CHAPA. CHAPA is Citizens Housing and Planning. They're on our steering committee. And as a matter of fact, on the 15th of September, there is a follow-up to that webinar we did on rental assistance. So if anyone's interested, I could send that information to you as well. But beyond that, what are you looking for, Karen? What do you?
Well, right before COVID hit, we had planned, a couple of us had planned to go to a workshop that you were hosting on the preservation restrictions and the housing restrictions on projects funded by CPA. where there's state and federal funding. So it's quite complicated.
Yep.
And so we had planned to go to that, and then COVID hit and it was canceled. So is there anyone here that thinks that that might be something that would be useful to us?
I'm not so sure that was our event. I'm wondering,
Yeah, it was.
for you guys, for Springfield?
No, it
No,
was
no.
for across the state. It was a workshop you were holding across the state, a live workshop, but it was canceled because of
But you sure it wasn't Mass Housing Partnership was, or whatever they're called? No?
Preservation Massachusetts?
no, it was
Nope.
coalition. Well, anyway,
I wonder if that was a workshop we were doing at someone else's conference.
possibly. Well, in any case, there was a major project that we had, the Mason Square Apartments, who ended up, they returned the funds. But in the meantime, it took us months to go through the contract and to go back and forth to see what, what our responsibility was and to share that. And so there isn't a lot of experience in the housing area for those type of big projects. So my question is there some assistance
Yes.
offer like this?
Yeah, no problem. So housing is, as you found out, incredibly complicated. And so I think we're sort of jack of all trades, master of none, right? The only thing I think our organization is really a master of is CPA itself, the Community Preservation Act. So when we get more detailed questions, especially in the housing area, which is so complicated, we have partners who are, that's what they specialize in. So the one for something like you're talking about is Mass Housing Partnership. And they have a free circuit rider service, which I think, Bob, you've spoken to Shelley in the past, haven't you?
Yes, I spoke
Yes.
to you as well.
So Shelley
Yeah.
was on maternity leave for 4 months and just came back last week because I had about 16 questions saved up for her, Karen, of similar things that we were waiting for Shelley to get back. But she's back in the saddle now and ready to go. And she does do presentations.
You know what? You're right. It was a workshop by Mass Housing. You're
Yeah.
right.
It was the Framingham workshop. We were going to be there. We were going to be there and be part of that. But that was the Mass Housing of Framingham housing workshop that they were planning to do. And we've spoken at that in the past, and that's the one that had to be canceled. It was right when COVID hit. It was really
Right.
possible whether they were going to do it or not. So that was Shelley that was putting that together. So, and I know she travels to communities all over the state. Now she would be doing it by Zoom, definitely. But if you need her contact information, I can give it to you. But she's really an expert in this and has a lot more of the nitty-gritty details, I think, that you're looking for.
Okay. All right. So I should get to her then and see if that's a workshop that they plan to do through Zoom rather than live.
Yep. And I think it has been rescheduled, frankly, Karen. So let me find out. I have to talk to Shelley about some other things this week anyway. So
Yeah, because I somehow remember, Karen, you're sending out an e-blast about some workshop, asked if anyone was interested. Gloria, I believe, responded and says she was. And so I think there's something coming up this autumn.
Like soon, I think.
yeah,
Well,
definitely the rental assistance one, which MHP is involved in, is on September 15th. But they did pick another date for what you're talking about. And so I'll find out for you, Karen.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. And we have similar people to recommend in the historic area. Preservation Mass, who's also on our steering committee, has 2 circuit riders for historic purposes. And open space, there's lots of people that we can refer you to since we sit in the offices of the Trust for Public Land. So
would you mind putting those contact information in an email and sending it? That would be great. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So you guys have more meeting to do. I will follow up with these 3 things: the bonding spreadsheet, I'll see if I can find out about rescheduling of Shelley's seminar and the Preservation Mass Circuit Riders too. And then if any other questions come up, we're only a phone call away. We're still working full-time remotely, and we're happy to help with anything you guys have.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stuart.
No problem. Great.
Thanks, Stuart.
Have a good
Thank
meeting.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a request coming from Home City Development regarding the affordability restriction that we had requested for the Elias Brookings projects. And let me just give you a little background before I turn it over to Peter. I had been under the impression that a perpetuity restriction was required if CPA money went into any housing project. And perhaps I misunderstood Shelley from the Housing Partnership. And Peter questioned that and followed up with Stuart at the coalition. And Stuart says the state law says that if you're using CPA money to acquire affordable housing, that has to be in perpetuity. But if you are helping in the other areas besides acquisition, the law is mute, and therefore it's up to the individual community preservation committee to decide the length of an affordability restriction on the units that they're assisting. So with that being said, let me turn this over to Peter.
Thanks, Bob. And I just want to start by saying thank you to all the members of the committee for approving assistance to us for this project. And we applied for this assistance back in at the beginning of the kind of the COVID era, I guess, back in must have been February or March. And even though the CPA portion of this project is a relatively small portion, it is really so significant because A, it's a local match, but B, we have experienced some real changes in the market for tax credits, both the low-income housing tax credits that we're using for this project and the state and federal historic tax credits. So, for instance, at the back at the time we applied to you, we were conservatively estimating that the low-income housing tax credits would generate 89.5 cents per dollar of tax credit. Okay, and that's how, if back in our budget we assumed $8.95 million in the low-income housing tax credits. Well, now, since the economy has done so poorly and companies don't have the profits that they need to protect as badly, the market for these low-income housing tax credits has changed, and they're now only offering us 86.5 cents. So it's a 3-cent difference, which comes out to a couple $100,000. And gee, guess what? The assistance that you're providing not only helps in that way, but it helps for it's not only helping in the purposes it's intended for, which is historic preservation and housing, but in really kind of helping make our budget whole. So again, I just want to say thank you so much for that. And let me explain, as Bob had indicated, all of our funders on these projects, and mostly it's DHCD, which allocates the federal low-income housing tax credits and offers us over $4 million of soft debt that comes into the project. It's money that comes in as loans. It accrues interest. It doesn't get repaid during the time of during the next 20 years. But I'm sorry, lost my train of thought here for a moment. All those resources, are really assisted by your funds, and then they all come with varying, because it comes from varying different sources of funds that have been authorized by the legislature over time. They all, so we've got some funds that are going to have a 30-year affordability restriction, some funds that are going to have a 50-year affordability restriction, and some funds that have a 45-year affordability restriction. So that's why when, I was talking with Bob about this, I said, well, I think that what makes sense here is for the CPC to follow the longest restriction that we already have. And so, as I indicated, one of those sources is a 50-year affordability restriction. And so I'm here to request today that the CPC agree to an affordability restriction for the 50 years rather than in perpetuity.
Yeah, and I would point out, Peter, we had asked for, was it 5 units for
Correct.
perpetuity, and you're willing to put all 42
Yeah, thank you.
under the 50 year.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Ralph, you're unmuted. You have a question?
Yeah. So maybe, Bob, maybe you could possibly clarify the difference between creation and acquisition of community housing.
Well, acquisition is when you buy it. So if
Right.
someone came to us and said, we want you to give us money because we're going to go out and buy this frumpy 2-family house with your money and fix it, that then would trigger a perpetuity restriction, just like if the city said, we're going out and buying a historic property because for whatever reason we want it, and we want CPA to fund the acquisition. That's a perpetuity preservation restriction. And if they went out and said, we want you to give us money so we could buy the Baraska farm, if it were still available, that would be a perpetuity open space restriction. So other than buying land that's, buying, let's call it fee simple, you're buying property, that's what the state law talks about.
So what you're saying is that if I am the owner of a property, I could come to this, I could put in a proposal for the CPC and say, I would like to, I'm not going to acquire, I already own the property, so I would like to create community housing. Therefore, I don't need to have a restriction.
No, I don't need to have a perpetuity affordability restriction. And
Could I do
then
2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Is that
what Stewart said is the state law speaks only to when you are buying property. That then requires a perpetuity affordability, preservation, or open space restriction. Anything less than that, he said it is up to the local CPC to decide. So if indeed the CPC said, oh, we're fine with a 10-year affordability restriction, and we're giving you 10 grand to help fix this frumpy 2-family house, since it's not acquisition, we have that flexibility.
well, it's good to know.
Well, yeah, I feel bad because part of the reason why the Mason Square project turned back its money is it didn't want to do perpetuity. But I have to say that Peter went out and did his homework and spoke to Stewart, as opposed to Gordon, who just said, I don't want it, and I don't want to give you a preservation restriction either, and I don't need your money.
No, I'm honestly though, I'm a little bit shocked because I'm going to have to reread the law again, but does this also call into question some of the other areas too? I mean, what about like rehabbing a historic structure? We were always under the impression it's a perpetuity restriction. I mean,
Oh no, yeah. So let me say this: it has never. I have never been under that thought, Ralph. I was aware that if it's purchased, that triggers it. I want us, the local committee, to adopt the fact that if we're giving CPA money to a historic resource, there will be either a perpetuity restriction or there will be a local historic district protecting the property. So that's been sort of what we've morphed into. Now, if the committee doesn't want to do that in the future, we can have that discussion. So I guess so. Peter's asking that we change our requirement, or that we've asked for, that instead of 5 units being a perpetuity affordability restriction into 42 units, we'll have the 50-year affordability restriction, which is in a sense coterminous with his other funders who have even stricter income limits than we do.
Well, I'd like to make a motion then to amend our recommendation to change the affordability restriction to 50 years from when it had previously been in perpetuity.
Yeah, and to expand it to all 42 units.
Yes, expand it to all 40 units.
Okay. Second?
Second,
Okay. Any further discussion? So we'll do the vote. Gloria,
yes.
Juanita,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Willie,
Yes.
thank
Yes.
you. And Bob is yes. So it passes. We will amend the requirement on that, Peter.
Thank you very much.
And just so you know, if things go well with the rest of this evening, we're hopeful of having at least most of our recommendations to City Council on the 14th. But stay tuned.
Perfect.
You can check in
Perfect.
with Karen or me, because obviously once it hits them, it's more or less out of our control. They're the ones that decide whether or not they're funding.
All right, thank you. And hey, if I can do just a quick commercial with you all for a moment. So, as you may recall, this building was hit by the tornado on June 1st of 2011 and basically sat vacant for a long time. And the city put a new roof on it. So it's been, maintained as very dry, and there's no mold, there's no moisture in the building. And so we've been in the process of clearing out all the debris that was in the building, debris and leftover, chairs and file cabinets and so forth. But we've assembled there's a substantial amount of usable educational materials, books, workbooks, all sorts of educational materials. And on September 12th, Saturday, September 12th, from 9 to noon, we're going to open up that portion of the building just in the gym. And we're inviting people in so that if there's, homeschoolers, teachers, childcare providers, et cetera, who want some of these books, it'll be open and people can come in and take whatever they want. So, if you want to pass my information along to folks, I can give more details, but we're looking to, pass on as much of these materials as we can. They're all in real good condition.
So Peter,
What
do you
about the,
flyer or some kind of email or something? Because I will get that information out.
Yeah, all right, I'll send you, we've got a Facebook post that we've done, and I can send you that if you would repost that.
Sure,
And
that's
I've got some other information that we could send you as well. We worked with the organization ROCA that works with young men who were have had experiences in the criminal justice system, and they've been cleaning out this building for us, and they've been doing a great job. So we're looking forward to trying to recycle as much of this stuff as we possibly can.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
I'll send you the information.
what about the furniture and chairs?
Yeah,
And
we have donated so much of it. The Restore in Westfield, the Eco Building Bargain Store, they came in and took things, and I've had people from day camps in the Berkshires. I had a charter school from Boston. The principal rented a U-Haul truck and came in and got some of these nice, they were folding cafeteria tables. So I had a cheesemaker from Leominster took the walk-in cooler. He brought in a team and disassembled the walk-in cooler. So I've been trying, I'm motivated by trying to save a few bucks, but it's great because we're able to recycle so much of this material that, I just was not going to send it all out in the waste stream. So it's been good, but we're pretty much done at this point. So I just wanted to just need more people to show up on September 12th. And Karen, I'll send you that information if you could share it as well. All right. So I want to thank you all very much for approving this tonight.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. So we have two projects that we voted to recommend, but we haven't put the finishing touches on them. And I guess let's start first with the Historic Home Restoration Program, which is going to be run by the Office of Planning and Economic Development, where we've actually voted to recommend the $200,000 they asked for. Ralph was going to be having a conversation with them. At the last meeting, there was a question of, do property owners, and we're giving this only to owner occupants, do they have to put some money in? And Ralph said he had submitted to planning a proposal that was a sliding scale of the percentage that an owner would have to have in the project based on their income. And there were a few other issues that we were still trying to hash out. So Ralph, I'm going to let you give us an update.
Sure. So I called Scott Hansen and I traded some voicemails with him, but he conveyed to me via the voicemails that they are okay with the restrictions that we put on them as far as the income eligibility. So that is not an issue for them. The other issue that we talked about was, since we generally ask for the work to be accomplished first before reimbursement, is that going to unfairly impact people who are of lower income and therefore can't front the money? So what I did is I got in contact with the Cambridge, the Cambridge CPA. Actually, it was the Cambridge. I think it was a Cambridge CPA person, and asked that question of him. And basically, Cambridge outsources their projects to a third-party organization. They just don't deal with the management of the money, basically. So they basically just give the money to, like a third party, and that third party works with the homeowners. So there was really no avenue there. I know that planning office, and I didn't directly address this with them, because my recommendation is that for the first year at least, we just go with a reimburse, the work is done approach, and it would be up to somebody doing the work to talk to their contractor, and perhaps the contractor would be willing to float, cover the money up front until the work is done, something along those lines for the first year, and see how it goes and see if there are issues with that, rather than trying to solve a problem that we don't know if it's going to be a problem or not. But I know that planning has basically, they have told me that they want to run this as easily as possible to them. So they don't want to be in charge of tracking progress of projects and doing half reimbursements and that kind of thing. They're interested in just, when the project is finished, they reimburse.
So Ralph, in terms of if it's when the project's finished, it's either the property owner has paid the contractor through the process and we reimburse the homeowner, or it's that the homeowner hasn't paid anything, assuming the contractor's comfortable with that, and we end up paying the homeowner who hasn't paid out any money to the contractor?
Honestly, I don't know that level of detail. I guess the point that I was trying to make is that instead of getting into a complicated type plan, planning is trying to make this simple, and that we should not be concerned with the details of how people are going to be able to float money to reimburse their projects. I think the stipulation that we want to hold here is that we don't pay money until the work is completed, because that is too risky to do otherwise.
Okay, but would it be correct to say that we would be comfortable making partial payments? At this point, though, that planning doesn't seem to want to bother making partial payments.
Personally, I don't think I would necessarily be, for the first year, I don't think it makes sense to get into that. I think that there's a lot of risk with that, and there's a lot of management that's involved with making partial payments. So somebody puts in, and this is primarily for refurbishing windows and what was the other thing? Storm
Painting.
windows, I think, was the other one.
Storm windows, real windows, and painting.
Right. Yeah. So painting is probably the best example, because certainly I know there are probably people on this meeting who have been defrauded by painters, or at least know people who have been defrauded by painters. So painting, I would not want to get into the issue where somebody comes along and says, I need $10,000 to paint, and it gets awarded, and then halfway through they say, well, I've done partial work. Can you give me $5,000? I mean, that's a thing that homes have to deal with. I don't think that's something that planning wants to deal with. Planning wants to say, hey, is the painting done? Yes. Okay, here's your money. And I don't think that, I'm not personally comfortable getting into the management of these small projects. If planning wants to do that at some point in the future, maybe, but I think that there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah, I guess my concern, Ralph, is more to when we take the project to the city council. I don't know whether they're going to have questions, in which case, then it will go to committee and planning will have to come to committee and we'll have to come to committee. But the more fleshed out the proposal is, the less the chance that city council will have questions that I'm not going to be able to answer in front of them.
No, I
So,
understand that. And I think
yeah.
that the answer is simply say money will be paid
Yep.
after completion of work, and let
Okay.
planning deal with how they want to actually get into the minutia about that.
Yeah.
But it's
Okay.
our restriction to say no upfront payments, basically, or no partial payments.
Yeah. Payment only on successful completion of the project.
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
I have a concern then. How are people going to afford to be able to take advantage of this project? Let's say,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, no, I was going to say, and there may be people who can't, and there may be people who can, and that's what we will find out in the year that's coming, whether there are people that have no ability to either upfront it their own money and then get reimbursed, or can go and get a equity, have an equity loan and can take that $5,000 to fix the windows, and once it's done, they get the $5,000 from planning and pay off the equity loan. But you're right, there will be people who won't be able to do that. But we don't know what percentage of the population will fall into that crack.
I have a question, Bob, pertaining to that. And I don't know if this is even something that we even want to think about. But if there's a preferred painter, say, for example, preferred painter, who is willing to absorb the cost until the job is done, is that like a bidding thing that painters could go out to bid, but they would have to agree to not charge the homeowner until the job was done and be reimbursed by us?
Yeah, I have no idea regarding that. That's really something that we would have to flesh out with planning. That's really going to be running the program. So just like with the first-time home buyer program, we're going to be giving the money into an account that is accessed by planning. They're not then going to come back to us and say, oh, the paint job on Clarendon Street is finished. Can we pay them? No, it will be their decision to go into the account that has $200,000 to begin with and saying we're taking $15,000 from here because Mary Smith is getting reimbursed the $15,000.
I'm just thinking, because when a job does go out to bid for the city, they need to have several bids for a project. I think it's over $10,000, I think. So, that just might be an opportunity for people to apply to be the preferred painter, and then that kind of eliminates all of our.
Or there could be a list. I mean, they could create a list of painters, contractors who understand the situation and are willing to complete the work and then get paid. But that's something I think they have to work out in planning.
Yeah, because I see, you can come up with a list, but, and then if something goes wrong with that painter, let's say, who's going to follow up on it,
But
my
I
only
think,
other thing I just wanted to say is I like the idea. Obviously, we approved it, but I'm very concerned the fact that there are going to be people that don't have the ability, whether it's money or whatever, to take advantage of the program because of the way of the reimbursement. And so, I mean, I could see something where somebody, let's say if they had to put windows in, they put in 10 windows, they could send a bill for those 10 windows and get reimbursed. So, and then they could put in the remainder of the windows. More like a good faith effort in between there to be paid.
And I certainly share that concern, Gloria. I think, though, that the point that I was trying to make is that for the first year at least, let's see how it goes. And if that is feedback that we're hearing, then we can modify when we have a little bit more experience under our belts. But I work in IT, and the big joke we always say is that we're like horrible at predicting how things are going to work in the future. So don't try to overplan this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I'm willing to go with an experiment, because there clearly could be people who say, well, why are you just doing this in McKnight? Why aren't we doing this in the other historic districts? And the answer is, you got to start somewhere. We're testing the waters. So this program is being crafted there is an owner component, starting with, having to put in a significant part of the project down to, if you're low enough income, you put in nothing, but it's still a matter of our money doesn't get paid out until the project is completed. That's what we're going to try for. We may find that there are only 3 people who take advantage of it, in which case, then next year, perhaps we talk about tweaking the program with the planning department. And it could be that, after we say to City Council that here's the program, and it's going to, we're really putting only 2 conditions on it: payment at end and percentage of owner occupant based on income. They may want to have additional requirements put on beyond what we're thinking of. So I guess to move forward with it, we probably should, because I don't think we took this vote at the last meeting, that there would be, that planning has agreed to the sliding scale that Ralph has proposed. So, unless someone remembers our voting on it last time, we probably should have a motion that one of the requirements is that there is an owner-occupant participation level based on a sliding scale. And then a second motion that says payment is made only on completion of project.
So I do have a question. I don't know if we discussed owner occupancy, because I don't recall doing that, and I don't believe that their application is for owner occupants.
Oh.
I believe I addressed that with them, and I think that I recall Scott Hansen saying, the goal is to get the property fixed up, whether it is a owner or it is somebody who is buying it to flip. Either way, the property is being fixed.
Well, I mean, their application says to homeowners. I personally interpret the term homeowner as being synonymous with the term owner occupant. To me, if I own an absentee property, I would never call myself a homeowner for that particular property. So in my mind, their application says owner occupants. But Scott's now told you something different.
Yeah, that's not, I mean, I wish that David was here, because he was in on the call. But my recollection is pretty clear that he did not mean owner occupants.
Well, so let me go back. I'm looking at the application. Does the applicant own the property? And their typed response, this program will require properties to be owner occupied.
Okay. Then
So
if it's in your application, there's no question then.
Yeah.
So, I think I remember them talking about that it had to be owner occupied. I remember.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, so that maybe we need to make sure we have the third requirement specifically: owner occupied, owner participation in the project based on sliding income scale, and thirdly, reimbursement or payment only on completion of the project.
That sounds good.
Do we
All right, so-
invite Scott to come back and just give additional details?
No, I think we have the details at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we may want to have more. I think we have enough details so that this can go with the other projects to City Council, City Council may send it to committee with other questions, and we may want planning to keep us in the loop on how they're tweaking the program. But I think that with those three restrictions, it's good enough to, in my mind, at least get it to City Council. Whether they choose to fund it or not is not our issue at that point. So I guess we need a motion on those three conditions.
So moved.
All right.
I'll
Any
second.
discussion? All right. So unless there's any further discussion, it's that the requirement is that it be limited to owner-occupied properties, that it be owner-occupant participation, meaning financial participation is on a sliding scale based on income of the owner-occupant. And thirdly, the program pays out the money only when the project is completed. So, Gloria,
Yes.
all in favor? Juanita,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Willie,
Yes.
and Bob, yes. Okay. So the other project was Trinity House that we voted to recommend, but we did not have a specific amount. And Ralph was going to be talking to them about the issues of the windows, because what they had said to us is on the first floor, they had windows, wood windows, but on the second floor, there were no windows. So Ralph, once again, I turn it over to you.
Yes, so I initially contacted Lisa Goodman, and she referred me to Pam Howland, who is very familiar with the property. And Pam, of course, confirmed that there are no windows on the second floor. And what I expressed to her was that my initial concern was that we saw a proposal that was for sort of low money. And then we saw another proposal that said, recreate windows on second floor, and it was for a substantially higher sum of money. And what Pam told me was that the initial proposal she withdrew because she didn't have the correct information. She was going by what a Pella representative had told her, and he didn't give the correct number of windows. So the proposal that we saw, which said to refurbish the first floor and basement windows and recreate the second floor windows, was the correct proposal. And I believe it was for like $45,000, if I'm not mistaken. And then I said to her, well, would it make more sense to, buy a commercial product for the second floor windows, because it sounded like it was going to be expensive. And she said, no, she has an agreement with a craftsman essentially to replicate the windows on the second floor using historic materials for $400 a window. So, certainly I know that when you talk to Pella and so on, that's cheap compared to Pella. Pella is usually $500-600 a window. Cheap vinyl windows are usually $300. So as far as I'm concerned, that the $400 cost for refurbishing or for actually recrafting the second floor windows is a reasonable cost. And I don't think we can't improve upon that, in my opinion. So based on that, and then there was another component to the proposal, which was $2,500 to refurbish 7 doors that are in the property. And so I think the proposal that Karen had sent out was I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, but was it around $53,000 or something?
I think so.
Karen,
Yeah, I can pull all that up again, but I think you're about right, Ralph.
Yeah, so, my concern originally was that maybe we could potentially shave some money off that, but it does not sound like there is room to shave off of that based on the talks I had with her. There is no room to sort of get a cheaper window, replace the missing windows. That is a very good price, $400 per window. Basically craft a wooden window.
What she submitted, and the last time go back on video. The last time that we went through this, the three areas that she was looking to fund came up to be what the budget was. I think it was just under it. So it seemed like it was.
What do you mean by-
reasonable. I'm referring to the windows, the doors, and the,
There's some repointing, I think. isn't
yes.
There was masonry, and in the original budget that they submitted also included some roof work.
I don't recall discussing the roof work at all, other than if it had pointing to be done, on the roof somewhere, but not the shingles, if that's what you're referring to, Bob.
Well, so I'm looking at the application, and at least in the budget that's in the application, I'm not seeing any place where they included masonry. But then sometimes things are, the pages are not necessarily in.
Yeah, there's a quote for, I'll pull it up. There is a quote there. I think it was for 39,000 or something. Let me see if I can find that.
Well, this is where, so I guess what we need to decide is exactly what we want to recommend as an amount. And so we need to figure out what was the quote from Pam Holland, as opposed to everyone saying, oh yeah, well, it was whatever Pam Holland's quote was. We need to find that and use that as a base point.
Right. So that's the email that Karen had sent out on July 21st. And it has, in that proposal is $45,500 for restoration of window sash, which was repair and reglaze 9 basement windows, repair and reglaze 14 windows on the first floor, manufacture and reglaze 14 windows on the second floor, and repair and reglaze the radius window on the front gable. So that was the $45,500. And then there was a second piece to that, second component, which was replace and build new frames for 7 doors, which was $7,500.
Mm-hmm.
And then the masonry was 37,700.
37,700.
Correct.
And Ralph, were the windows 45,000 even, or was there some
45,500.
45,500? So
yeah.
I'm doing some quick math here. So 45,500, 7,500, and 37,700, if my math is correct, is $90,700. And then if we wanted to, if we were adding in what they have for the roof was 16,100.
So that was in the original application?
That was in the original application, and originally they were asking for 124,008.
And we approved.
Nothing. We approved that we were going to recommend it, but we approved nothing. We tabled that. That's tonight's discussion.
So, I mean, I guess my, and I apologize for this, but I was not under the impression, so I did not speak to her about the roof or the masonry because I didn't think that was something I needed to do.
But the other
you're right, Ralph.
Was the funding. Before we had done anything, did she have other funding sources, or what was their fundraising prospects or plan for the remainder
At the last meeting, did we?
to be done?
Yeah, once again, I forget whether at the last meeting we took a vote. I mean, I have no problem recommending funding for this project, one of the conditions that I think needs to be there is that CPA money does not come in until she's proven that she's got the remainder of the funding source. So if this is, their budget showed that this was a $250,000 rehab job, and let's just for round figures say that we're in for 90,000. She's got to raise the rest, and I don't want to see us spend money on windows and pointing, only to find out that the rest of the house sits empty and untouched because she hasn't been able to raise the rest of the money. So that is a concern. But to me, that's a concern after we decide how much we want to give them.
Does your 90,000 include the roof?
The 90,000 does not include the roof, Willie. If we included the roof, that would, let me just get my pencil out again.
I think it would be 124, right, that she originally asked?
No, that doesn't get to the 624. It gets to 106,800. So, I guess I would be comfortable recommending up to that amount, but I don't, I leave it to what the rest of the committee wants to do.
She has a lot of other sources here, but it was never clear whether she actually had them.
Correct.
Well, Bob, I like your idea about holding off on CPA funding until she sends us an acknowledgement of having the rest of the funding to complete the project.
Is that harsh? Because for a lot of projects that we funded, I don't know if we've ever made that stipulation.
Well, so hang on a second. So Gloria, I want to clarify what you just said. You mean hanging off on providing the funds for the work, or holding off on approving the proposal? Because we've already approved the proposal, right?
Right, but until we know that there are additional funds to complete the project, we would not release CPA funding.
Okay.
Yeah, so we wouldn't go under contract. Yeah, and I guess to speak to Karen's issue, there, in most cases we're dealing with municipal departments. There are instances where we're dealing with non-municipal people, and I have to say that this is the application that showed up with one copy in a box with no electronic copy that we've had to handhold down the line. So unlike the drama studio that's been around and competently running its program for 20 years, or the Springfield Museums, or Develop Springfield, I see no track record and I don't see any great consistency here. So I'm more concerned about the if we indeed put our money in and we get fixed up windows and a fixed up roof and the building continues to sit there, that's an embarrassment for us. So, I would recommend it to the city council and just say as one of our conditions, we're not contracting with them until they prove that they have the rest or a significant portion of the funding lined up to do what we're not paying for.
Did she identify did she identify what she was going to do to the building besides the windows, the doors, the roof, that she was seeking additional funds for? What was she planning on using that money for? What was she planning on seeking additional money to do in that building?
So the budget that she gave us, Willie, had a variety of inside work, insulation, flooring, wallboard, paintings, cabinets, because the building was, her goal is to turn it into a shelter for women. And those were all parts of the costs that she had in this much larger budget. And then, of course, Stuart said, temporary housing is not CPA eligible. So she's not eligible under community housing. She's only eligible under historic. And that's where we're now backing off and saying, well, we'll help will help with the exterior of this historic building. So she needs to come up with the stuff that deals with all of the plumbing and carpentry and painting issues that's going to be going on inside.
Those
She-
additional work that you just mentioned, that doesn't fall under the category of eligibility for community preservation funds. The interior
Well,
work does not fall under. Am I correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, you always have to have a public purpose, and we would argue that fixing up the outside of a historic building has a public purpose. Fixing up the inside is less so. I mean, in the case of the drama studio, we are helping with a fire suppression system, so that's preserving the historic resource in case there is a disaster. But doing the kinds of things like putting in new bathrooms and putting in kitchen cabinets, is really not a historic preservation item that we would think be wanting to participate in.
Rather than
Okay.
having the city council address this, like send this in saying that we wouldn't fund it unless she could come up with other sources. Has anybody contacted her about proving that she has some of those other sources with letters or?
Thought that's what was going to be, that was what was asked at the last meeting to do,
From her?
that we wanted that from her.
Okay, and has she hasn't,
I
she hasn't supplied that.
thought you were going to address that when you talked to her, or no?
I don't recall that whatsoever. That I was never going to address finding out what her funding sources were. Absolutely
Yeah.
not.
I don't remember
Yeah,
that
my
either.
understanding, what Ralph was there to give us his expert opinion on the windows.
Okay, maybe I sent her an email on that, so let me check.
So can I just ask a side question here? Do we have an electronic copy? Did we ever have an electronic copy of this proposal? Because I couldn't ever find one. This is what I think was hand delivered, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard copy.
Yeah, I brought everyone a copy.
Yeah.
She had it.
But is there an
printed.
electronic copy of it? Was an electronic
Oh,
copy
an
ever sent?
electronic copy. Yes,
Oh, okay. Maybe I just missed it then.
I'll send it out to you.
Well, while Karen's looking for that, I mean, I guess the question is do we vote on an amount and send it to City Council with one of the conditions being that we will not execute a contract until the remainder of the funding sources are in place? Or do we postpone even sending this to City Council? I would not hold up the rest of them because of this. So, and there's nothing that says that all CPA applications have to go in one fell swoop. So we do have the possibility of saying, well, this may not get to the council on the 14th. Maybe it'll go in October if we get the answers to the questions of where's the money coming from. And I think Karen raises a point. She may not have all of her money lined up. So I'm not expecting that she has the full 250,000 ready to go or 150,000, but clearly we shouldn't be the first people to start putting real cash into the building.
I think
I'm more inclined to go with sending it to the city council with the, I can't think of the word, Bob, but about
Condition?
condition, thank you. It just went out of my head. As opposed to then going back and getting more information. This is one of the problems about not providing accurate information when you submit a proposal.
Yeah.
Right, but we are a relatively new group, and if we do want more community projects to come forward, we do have to do a little hand-holding, and I feel like that's part of what we should offer.
But Karen, then if that case, then it's you who's holding their hand.
Well, I think part of the problem here is that I think that their request originally it was that they were expecting the CPA to fund the majority of this, including the interior work, because they were considering it to be a housing proposal. And once
Well,
we
they
sort
were
of said
asking-
no, that's
Well, no,
Well-
they were asking, they had a $250,000 project, and they
Yeah.
were asking for us to fund $125,000. So they were asking that we fund half of it. If we decide to just stay to the exterior, we'll be funding about $106,000. If we only do the windows and the masonry and the doors, we'll be at closer to $90,000.
sure.
You know,
Go ahead,
I
Juanita.
understand, you know, that she didn't send it all in. I also understand that this was sent in. She lost both of her parents with COVID right at the beginning, right when this was sent in. And I mean, rather than sending it to city council, I think I'd like to wait to see from her, to hear from her that she has some other monies. And yes, do we give her a little, we slack on her just because there was a lot going on when she turned this in? And I'm willing to give her a little break because of that.
See, I don't mind committing the money because I think that somebody needs to take a step forward, but I don't want to pay the money up front. I mean, I agree with what Bob is saying, is that, you know, we
No,
don't want to put the money into the building and have it be empty.
No.
But on the other hand, we don't also want, go ahead.
I agree with you, Ralph. I agree with you. And I agree with Bob. I'm just saying, rather than sending it to, I think once it goes to city council, then it opens up a whole other thing, when it would be just easy for us to find out from her if she has other monies.
But
and
my
then
guess is she won't
and she
have
could
that
prove
other
that.
money.
Pardon?
But my guess is she will not get that other money until somebody steps forward, like an organization like us, saying we're putting in, you know, $90,000 or $100,000. I think that is going to make it easier for her to find the rest of
I
the money.
agree.
Well, even if she said we're putting in 124,000, if she can prove she has other money.
I agree with Ralph on that. I think that if we put forth the $124,000, that's going to give her leverage to get additional monies to complete the project. She's not going to the table empty-handed. So I will be more inclined to want to say, let's approve the $124,000 subject to
Right.
her demonstrating that she has the balance. And I don't know if we should table it until October, but I'm open to it if that's what you want to do. But I think the $124,000 leverage will give her something to bring to the table when she talks to the financial people out there.
I agree.
Would you consider off-cycle funding this to give her time?
Nah,
I don't think we're approving it. All we're saying is just show us you have the other additional funding. And I agree with Willie and what Ralph said. This will help her. It's not punitive. It's really being a positive move.
So we're not going to give her the same deadline as everyone else, which will probably be like November, you know, 2021.
no, but hang on a second. That what I was trying to imply was that I think that we should recommend a funding amount. We can decide on what that is. With the condition that the money will not be paid out until the entire project is until she assembles the funding for the entire project. So in other words, she can't just do the window work and the masonry. But I think that by us granting her the money, and she actually has that grant and the contract is written, that's going to allow her to go to another organization and say, can I borrow money against this or et cetera. I don't think it's going to give her very much if we say, yeah, we'll give you money in the future if you can come back to us with the rest of it. It has to be a positive commitment.
If you put that in the form of motion, Ralph, I would support that. It was put in the form of motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think the first motion is we need to decide, are we giving her $90,700, which is the windows and the doors and the masonry, or are we giving her $106,800, which is those three things plus the roof budget that she had in her application? Or I suppose we could give her the $124,000, but we're not sure what else that's going to.
I'm comfortable with windows, doors, roof, and masonry.
Say that again, Ralph?
I said I'm comfortable with windows, doors, roof, and masonry. So what is that, 109,000?
106,800.
Okay, so I make a motion that we award 106,800 to the Trinity House. And I guess that'll be it for now. We can do the rest of it later.
Yeah. Okay. So recommend 106,800 for windows, doors, masonry, and roof at Trinity House. Any
And that's
further
not-
I
discussion?
second that.
Pardon?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Well, no, I'm just saying, should we add in there that it is contingent on her getting other
Well,
monies?
Well, we're voting the recommendation, and then we take a separate vote on the
Oh, okay.
conditions.
All right. Okay,
So-
I second that.
Yep. All right. So, unless any other discussion, we'll vote. Gloria,
Yes.
Juanita,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Willie,
Yes.
and Bob, yes. So now we need a motion on what the condition will be, which I think we're in agreement that she needs to, before any of our money gets paid out, she needs to come up with at least most of her financing.
So
Or
moved.
however someone wants to work, whatever you feel
So
comfortable
how
with.
should we say that? So, I mean, so I guess the condition we're trying to prevent is and then having no other money lined up so that the building is just an empty shell afterwards. How do we prevent?
You want to give a percentage, like 90% complete or 75%?
Well, no, it's not the completed part. It's not. It's more like I think of how to say this. So we're awarding her the money, but we don't want. So what would happen if this happened? Let's say that we awarded her the money, and then she says, "Yeah, I have the rest of it. Trust me," right? And then does the work. It's all complete, and then the rest of the work doesn't happen. That's what we don't want to happen. So how do we ensure that she really does have the rest of the money lined up to do the rest of the work?
Do we
Well,
ask
I mean, if we ask for the money, if we ask for her to verify it. So if she would have letters from these different organizations, I think she has Community Foundation, and if she had letters from them, that would be sufficient for me.
Okay, so we call it like demonstrated financial commitment or something like that? Is that what they call it in this world?
I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, we know what we're talking about. We want letters of commitment for the remainder part of the project,
There
which
you
is
go.
about $125,000.
That sounds good. Letters of commitment.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so
So
I make a motion that the condition that we add is that, how do I say this?
Prior
It's not
to the-
before we grant.
Prior to release of the funds, that she must present letters of commitment from various financial institutions for the balance, but they have to be cleaned up a little bit. You want documentation that she has commitments to the remaining balance from financial institutions. But it has to be cleaned up. I know what we're looking for also.
Okay. So
Yeah.
then I guess the
And-
motion is that, oh, go ahead, Bob.
I'm just going to say it doesn't have to necessarily be financial institutions. It needs to be funders. So
Right,
whether if
funders.
if the community foundation gives their money, to me a financial institution is a bank.
Right. Now she's got the George Davis Foundation so she's applied to some heavy hitters, so she should have some money.
Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't find a letter to her asking her for those commitment letters. So would you like me to send that out to her, or do someone want to call her?
I'm not calling.
Well, so here's the thought is after we take the vote on whatever this is, Karen, you will contact her to say, we will be recommending 106,800 and what we will be as a condition is whatever we ended up voting. Yeah, that we will not be releasing our money until she's proven through commitment letters that she has a substantial portion of the remainder of the project taken care of.
Okay.
All right. So, Ralph, did you make a motion on that?
All right, I'll try to say the motion a little bit better. So I make a motion that a condition we place on this is that before the money is released to her, the work A has to be completed, and B, she has to provide demonstrated financial commitment to the remainder of the project for the balance of the project to get it to completion.
I'll second that.
Sound good?
I'm
Okay,
not sure
so it's
about
really-
A.
So it's really two components. Like everyone else, we're saying you do the work, we reimburse you for the cost of the work, but we're not even going to do that unless you've already proven to us that you have financing commitments from other funding sources to complete the project.
Yes.
Do we say prior approval? Prior approval for financial? Should we use the word prior approval?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess, if she shows that she's got letters of commitment from the Davis Foundation and from Mass Mutual and from whomever that says they're all chipping in and that totals, let's say, 130,000, I would be comfortable with that. If she's only got a letter of commitment of 25,000 from someone, it would be questionable in my mind as to how are you coming up with the rest of the money to do the project.
Right.
Okay, fine. You need a second on that motion?
Yes. Okay.
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion? All right. So vote on it. It's a two-part. It contains two components. One, that there needs to be letters of commitment for funding the remainder of the project, and two, the windows, doors, roof, and masonry needs to be done, and then we reimburse the costs of doing that. Gloria,
Yes.
Juanita,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Willie,
Yes.
and Bob is yes. All right. So after our marathon meeting of July, I decided that if the meeting goes longer than 2 hours, I will ask the committee whether they want to continue or how long they want to continue meeting for. We still have an update from Karen on the fiscal 18 and 19 projects, and a brief discussion about next month is the public hearing to solicit comments on CPA needs and opportunities in the city. So how much are people willing to go forward? Gloria?
Bob, I would like to suggest that we hold off on review of the projects because Karen sent that today, I believe. So we could review it and at the next meeting have our questions so she doesn't have to go through every single thing. And
Yep.
we can, if we have any questions, we can ask them then. But that we should spend maybe 15, 20 minutes on how we're going to do the annual meeting.
Okay. All right. Does that sound fine with people?
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
idea.
All right. Well, very good. So, the law, this overarching CPA law, requires us to do a CPA plan every year. And as part of doing that plan, we are required to hold a public hearing. So this will be a virtual public hearing. I don't know the mechanics of that. Karen, if you need to, one, read Chapter 44B as to what the specific requirements for the public hearing is. My recollection is that we have to put an ad in the local newspaper 2 consecutive weeks prior to the hearing. I don't think it speaks to whether it's a legal ad or whether it's a display ad. I think we've done both. I'm not sure. The folks in the budget office will know what they paid for. And you need to read the city ordinance that created the committee, because I believe the ordinance says we have to send written notice to every neighborhood council listed on the city website 3 weeks before the public hearing. So the bottom line is that we need to get started on both the ad and the letters, because we meet on October 6th. And if my memory serves me correct, that means the letters have to be sent by the week of the 14th. Not that it's a big thing. I've got the stock letter probably in my file that I can send you, Karen, and you can just tweak it and then mail it out on CPA stationery. So the bigger thing is this is an opportunity for the public to come and say, my neighborhood has, needs better play equipment in the playgrounds, or I've got these vacant rundown houses. We'd love to see owner occupants in them, whatever it is, but it's an opportunity. I don't know how we deal with that kind of public hearing during a remote meeting. So that's probably the type of thing that we need to sort of play around with as to, how do people get us their responses? Do they sign up and they're actually admitted to the Zoom meeting? Or is everyone emailing us or paper mailing us their comments? I would keep in mind that at least in the past, these hearings have probably had 10 people at them. So it's not like there's a huge number of people, and they've usually generated some people who then send in letters rather than attending. So anyways, I don't know whether, Karen, you've got thoughts or anyone else has thoughts.
And I know that in some of the meetings, people just come to listen. So they may not even come with an idea. They're there to listen to other people. And you're right. There's only been about 10, so it could work on Zoom. They would have. I mean, they would have to. I don't know. Make a reservation.
Maybe we should talk to Steve at Focus Springfield and see if we can open up the Zoom and maybe it's a webinar type format. Ralph, maybe you have some suggestions here so that people can participate.
And are we talking about that for the next meeting? Is that what?
Yes. Yeah, that's the October 6th meeting.
Would be opened up to the public. That would be the public meeting.
Yes, and even if when we met with all of the applicants this year, if you remember, what we said on the agendas that went out and that were posted on the website is if you wanted to publicly address the committee, you needed to email Karen by a particular cutoff date. And I don't think we had anyone who took us up on that. But we were prepared with the Focus Springfield sessions that we had, that someone could email and come in at the public comment time, I think. Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, pretty much. That's We did have
And
a couple people, but yeah.
I would go with that, Bob, other than opening it up, because as we'll remember, when this first started, there were a lot of pornographic things that went through because it was an open meeting, not here, but at other places, so that we were specifically told to keep it private. So I would suggest that people have to sign up beforehand to join the meeting. And that might be by the deadline. That might help.
So do we want to consider having it live?
I would like to say that I don't see a great need to use the sign-up mechanism. I know there's a lot of initial press about people bombing into meetings, but I think that that risk is minimum, and I think that it can be handled because I think that there is an administrator of the meeting who can let people in, so they would take their information and let them in. I feel like having a few days sign up is just sort of an unnecessary barrier. And I do know that other communities don't require initial signups. They do allow people to come in the day of the meeting, essentially.
May I ask, when the city council has their speak out meetings, how are they handling it?
I think you do have to sign up for city council, but you had to sign up for city council even before we were going with remote meetings. You couldn't just show up and speak.
correct.
So what are you suggesting, that we have a regular Zoom meeting, and then anyone that wishes to, and we can make the link public so they can watch and
Yeah.
ask a question?
And then if they want to ask to participate, then they can,
We
rather
could,
than
and
have to sort of commit several days ahead of time.
Yeah.
We
So
could
let me throw.
Put them on screen, like everyone that logs in, even if they're not going to ask a question, everyone that logs in is visible.
Yeah, but let me back up, and maybe I'm being too much of a strict interpretation. This is not a time for people to come and ask us questions. This is the time for people to come and tell us what they think their needs are
Right.
that CPA can address. So this is not one of, how do I fill out an application? When will applications be available? Can I do this project? No, that's not what this meeting is about. This meeting is for
Agreed.
people to talk about needs and opportunities that we may decide that we want to include in the plan as we tweak it.
Yes, I agree.
Should we have a link to the last year's CPA, like so people could read what's on there? Like what's current that we're going to be changing or looking at to change?
Well, the plan is already online, correct?
Yes.
So we're not looking to change anything other than we will be changing the proposed timetable. Perhaps we may, based on what we hear, and we will also have to notify the various departments that do CPA that we're soliciting their input as well. I forgot to mention that. So Park Department, Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Planning Commission, Housing Authority, in case they have things they want to say are needs. But certainly they can look at the last year's plan and see what we said.
Do we need to do this on October 6th, or can we push it to maybe the following week?
We can push it. We clearly can push it based on what CPC members can make. I mean, the bottom line is we are required to do this, but whether we do it at a regularly scheduled meeting and whether we move the regularly scheduled meeting, I'm not sure what moving it a week later will do. So.
Well, I mean, if you say that, needs to be 3 weeks, right? So you're talking next week that we need to formulate all this, figure out
No.
if we're going to do Focus Springfield or how, and then have it all ready in a week.
Well, yes, obviously, if we're thinking of using Focus Springfield, we need to make sure that Focus Springfield can indeed accommodate us. And if they say we can't accommodate you on October 6th, but we can accommodate you on some other time, then we may have to indeed change the meeting.
Right, but you're saying that a newspaper has to go out with 3 weeks' notice, correct?
No, you didn't. So the letter to the neighborhood council needs 3 weeks' notice, I believe. Read the ordinance.
Okay.
And that's simply the Community Preservation Commission will hold a Zoom meeting on to solicit comments on future CPA. So it's not, so other than saying, yes, we need to know, is it going to be hosted at Develop Springfield or are we hosting it? I mean, that clearly needs to be resolved.
Right.
And the legal ad is a stock ad that will simply tell people how they log in to wherever the meetings are being held.
And that can be a week before? I'll read the statute, but.
No, we have to have we have to have the ads in 2 weeks, 2 consecutive weeks prior to the hearing. So let's just pretend that we are indeed meeting on October 6th. We should have this run probably in the on the 29th of September and the 22nd of September, and the letter to the neighborhoods needs to be in the mail by the 15th of September. So.
Okay.
Now the bigger question is whether, if Develop Springfield can't host us, period, well then we need to figure out a format that works for this. And that may be only people signing up, because how many people can this account handle, Karen?
99.
Oh, well, I don't think we'll need that. So I have no problem if. Go on, Ralph.
We should try to go to Springfield.
Say that again, Ralph. I didn't hear you.
I think we should try to engage with Focus Springfield and do it the way we did our first couple of meetings, doing it live. If that's a possibility. I think this is an annual meeting, and it's important enough to do that. And
get it onto their channel as well, channel 17.
Right, and that would also allow, but I also think we should allow that if somebody does happen to be watching it, that they don't have to. They can say, oh, now that I'm doing this, I would like to provide public comment as well, even though I didn't sign up 3 or 5 days earlier or whatever. And I think that Focus Springfield, I would certainly defer to if they strenuously objected against that, then I would say, okay, fine. But I would really like to get to the point where I don't think it's going to be that many people anyways. I think it's going to be manageable, and I think the risk of somebody sort of Zoom bombing or whatever is incredibly low.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so why don't we say this? Right now, we're saying it's October 6th. Karen will contact Focus Springfield, and if they say, oh, well, we can do it, but not on the 6th, here are the dates to choose, Karen will then send out a doodle poll to see what date works for the most number of committee members. And we will change it to whatever that is. I mean, it doesn't have to be at a regularly scheduled meeting. It could be any time in October. It could even be in November. But I'd rather have it sooner than later, because then once we have the public hearing, that's when we start tweaking the plan. And clearly I don't disagree with Ralph that if we can have it set up that anyone can attend the meeting, Karen controls them. If they start being unruly or irrelevant, they get muted.
Sounds good.
All right. There we go.
All right.
So that sound like a plan with everyone? Tentatively the
It
6th?
sounds
but-
perfect.
Yeah.
Sounds
All right.
perfect.
Good with me.
All right. So
So
we'll have a
Ralph,
motion.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say we have a motion to adjourn.
Oh, motion adjourned.
Second,
All right. All right. Gloria
yes.
voting. Juanita,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Willie,
Yes.
and Bob, yes. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Karen. We'll see everyone, and hopefully, let us know as soon as you can, Karen, as to what works with Develop Springfield. And obviously, if they say, sorry, we can't help you anymore, period, then maybe you and Ralph and I will have a discussion as to what plan B will be without Develop Springfield, Focus Springfield.
And I apologize too. I'm not sure if my internet, what the problem was, why I couldn't get this on Facebook and why I was having a problem with pulling up documents. So I think I'm going to do a little Zoom work here and find out what the problem was. I don't want to see that happen again, especially when
Yeah.
you have guests. So I apologize.
Yeah,
But
so let me ask
I know you were in IT. Like
Yeah.
maybe you could be doing some of this. Would be
So Karen, let me ask you this. Is there any reason why you're attempting to get us on Facebook streaming can't start as soon as you show up? And so, yes, Facebook is streaming as Gloria logs in and Juanita logs in, as opposed to waiting for the quorum, and then you try to log in, and then we spend 20 minutes as part of the official meeting not being able to do anything.
Sure. I guess we could just leave the agenda up and just as people came in, it's just something to look at while they're waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're going to have technical problems, I'd rather start the technical problems, early. Yeah. So there's less of it as the actual meeting starts.
Okay.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you, everyone.
All right. Now put
Joy.
Good
the
night.
recording up on our page.
Good night.
Good
All
night.
right. Bye.